Hello, I'm Anna Serrano, President and Vice Chancellor of OCAD University in Toronto, and welcome to the President's Speaker Series. Our goal here is to spotlight interesting, inspiring, and challenging voices that are shaping the present and future of Canadian society. In this video, I'm thrilled to introduce artist and OCAD University graduate Rajni Perera, who gave a keynote address at the 2023 DemocracyXChange Summit. OCAD University co-hosted the summit called DXC, along with Toronto Metropolitan University and the Open Democracy Project. This summit is a gathering of people, from students to policymakers, politicians to educators, and artists to entrepreneurs who are committed to engaging in conversations on pressing issues facing democracies today. Rajni is one of Canada's most celebrated contemporary artists. She was born in Sri Lanka and now lives here in Toronto. She's had exhibitions all over the world, and her work is in the collections of the Art Gallery of Ontario and the National Gallery of Canada. Rajni is a true multimedia artist, working with paintings, sculptures, and photography. As many of you know, artists throughout history have held an important role in society by fighting for and upholding democracy and freedoms. Rajni Perera is part of this artistic tradition. Artists throughout history have held an important role in society by fighting for and upholding democracy and freedoms. Rajni Perera is part of this tradition. Her subversive aesthetic is directed at antiquated, oppressive discourse. It acts as a restorative force through which people can move outdated, repressive modes of being towards reclaiming their power. Inspired by sci-fi, Rajni's work may look whimsical, but she's tackling serious topics like migration and climate change. Rajni also talks about the threats to artists themselves and artistic freedom, including funding cuts, gentrification, and affordability issues. As you'll hear Rajni say, artists provide the blueprint for dissent, assurance, condemnation, feeling safe and feeling seen. I hope you're as inspired by Rajni's keynote as I am. Let's begin.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Anna. You're the best for inviting me for this. And, you know, I really love your bright and joyful tone on welcoming artists into a stage, into a political arena, and like talking about our participation there. My tone on this is a little bit more analytical, and it's not cynical, but it's a little bit more of a deep dive into sort of the, you know, as much as we need to and have to give you as artists and makers and thinkers, there's a lot between us and you. And I want to touch on some of these forces, as he had mentioned. So I wanted to start the talk by saying that, you know, speaking about the concept of democracy within the grips of late capitalism, especially as someone who practices in the arts, is very strange. I have never been asked to speak on a concept such as democracy that's so overarching, so bright like a rainbow. And I'll do my best, as this term, as it relates to the arts, is now, it's sort of obscured and multifaceted for people who work inside the arts and culture. Slide 1, please. So while, you know, during story time, when we're children, you may have heard that everyone is an artist. So this isn't true. I went to OCAD at the time, and it's OCAD U now, and I had to build up lots of chops to face the world and speak my voice. You know, at the time when I was at school, it was a very different place than it is now. But you know, being an artist of color, being an artist who is a woman, there were a lot of obstacles there that, you know, I had to face during that time to come out in the place that I am now. As practicing professional artists, we face many barriers as we dance inside this circus of the art world. While there is no dispute for me whether or not artists are leaders of thought and vision and beacons of the ideal democratic state, the fact that it's regarded as a privilege to practice it seriously and say your piece misses the point entirely. It is our duty. It is my duty. The fact that it is regarded as a privilege which is marketed as aesthetic and frivolous only and misunderstands the skill and gumption it takes to stand up and speak out is designed because artists are dangerous. We can see it in the case of artists like Pussy Riot, Sun Ra, Ai Weiwei, who is not allowed into his country any longer, that artists are dangerous politically. Next slide. This is a more accurate map of the issues we face in bringing you our voice. These are some of the factors, some would call them barriers, between us and you. Keep in mind that as workers in the arts and in culture, we take the first steps into what can be regarded as unknown cultural territory. Why am I complicating things? Why can't I just be a bright, shining rainbow? Because it's complicated. Without addressing these issues, I cannot address our practices in building and operating within a democracy. These are issues which relate to artists and the way we speak, make, and live. We must localize the issue so we may face these barriers properly. Next slide. So, artists. This is a stock photo that I took off the internet. I love stock photos. So let's think about what a stock photo means, why it's used. You know, businesses use them. We're living in, we're deeply capitalistic in the way things move, who gets to speak, why, when they get to speak, convenience of, what it is that they have to say during the time that they say it. So I really look to stock photos to get an idea of, because artists operate within bubbles to some degree, so we live within it's not safe for us in the world, normally. So we live inside bubbles of friends and institutions that love us and treat us well, and groups of people. So I really love stock photos to give myself an idea of what the world, the marketing world, the business world thinks, so this is a business school, business world thinks about who we are. So if we can analyze this cross-section of stock photos, you'll see that there are children being silly. Everyone's white in this whole cross-section. They're having a nice time, so no one's struggling. It seems to be very sort of, recreational, I guess is the word. So I really, when I started this, I just wanted to do something like that, to take a step back and think about, the fact that we're as effective. Our effectiveness is directly affected by a perception of us to some degree. So this is problematic, this is an issue, because the role that artists play in being thought leaders, being people who are getting into ideas and taking them apart and doing things with them, it's not generally recognized, it's not really seen. The idea of the artist in North America has suffered greatly in marketable times. We contend now with ideas of commercialization heavily. There is an obscurity novelizing the notion of artists expressing themselves politically and strongly. And some of the examples would be people like Sun Ra and Pussy Riot. I want to point out that within capitalism, if it's not what you're doing isn't saleable, you're single-handedly devalued. So that's something that we're up against at all times. It devalues what it cannot sell. And in the case of institutions, it is ideas that are deemed indigestible, radical, or unpalatable. This is often a projection, actually, of the generic squeamishness of the institution itself to present these ideas as its own by proxy. These issues of representation have had a drastic effect on the ability to be seen diversely and radically and heard within art institutions. So we can see censorship come into play here as well, although it's not up here. It's an issue of representation. My point here is that art cannot, or is very rarely able to, serve its function in society under the conditions in which it operates. There is lots of work to be done in order to restore us to the bridge, in the words of Captain Kirk. Let's begin with treating artists well. Next slide. This is from an Instagram account that I love. They are called the White Pube. Please follow them. They're incredible folks from the UK. They came to my exhibition in Birmingham, which I was so honored because they're so salty. And they were being really nice. They were just like, this is a good exhibition. I was like, thank you so much. I thought I would be roasted. And, you know, they're very real. They live in another city that's a cultural hub, you know, where artists are, again, looked to come up with versions of a better world, and under duress, just like in Toronto. Some of the factors, I mean, I can identify with everything here. I just thought it was a great thing, and I wanted to show it to you, just to put some realism into the idea that we're able to generate beautiful ideas for you from nothing. Artists are leaving cities or cultural hubs at breakneck rates. Funding cuts, such as what we have been seeing right here in Ontario, it should not be left to the provincial level whatsoever in any case. Funding cuts at the provincial levels. Gentrification removes the rights of artists to live, work, and commune. Factors such as development, over-commercialization, and renovictions greatly affect us as well in our delivery of ideas to you. Recognizing and nurturing artists' voices is crucial to a healthy democracy and vital to dissent. So, as a part of what it is that we bring to the table in showing you a better world, dissent is a huge part of that. Institutions are having a hard time really putting it forward. In the last slide, I'll give you a very good example of, even though we have institutional participation in the idea of dissent and an exhibition about it, there's an inability to follow through at the end of the day. So it's just the things that we need to work on in nurturing our artists. We need to advocate for inclusive, diverse, differently abled, non-commercial voices within artist spaces. We will give you the steps that are closer to building a society that moves compassionately, justly, and understands more about where and when we are. Next slide. This is a graph that shows an average of hired ethnic groups by North American art museums and institutions in the years I believe it's 2015, 2018, and 2022, yep. This was very popular when it came out because it's not really changing. As someone who comes from an immigrant city, I can discern from this a certain, inequality that will also spill into the audience, and who comes in, who is attracted by who's being shown in these spaces, which is, of course, organized by the staffing. So this is staffing on many levels, from I think mostly boards, admin, and then down to the daily workers of the institutions itself. While social media has alleviated the need for institutional recognition and sustenance greatly, institutions and spaces most generously funded and typically associated with engagement with artwork and the artists themselves struggle to maintain relevance. Next slide. This is a photograph of an exhibition called Medicine for a Nightmare by the artist Nepsidhu. It was in 2018 at Mercer Union Gallery. The show Medicine for a Nightmare in 2018 spoke on the atrocities of the Indian government on the Sikh people of Punjab, particularly the attack of Amritsar in 1984. This was a show that changed the idea for the institution, the Mercer Union, of what an audience for an art show is and can be. by way of the fact that the issues that were being addressed were issues personally experienced and lived within by immigrant groups from the far east and west parts of the GTA, so they don't live downtown, they're not participating in the art scene, really changed the dynamic of how the gallery is going to interact with an audience now and through what channels. In doing this, the artists purposely engaged with programming, school visits, and talks, especially a working class immigrant audience. And it was mostly who are mostly directly affected by Indian ethnic cleansing themselves. The show was subject to criticism by white or colonized art critics for its refusal to participate in exclusive and academic language and behavior. So ultimately, the institution at the time, a time of putting on this exhibition, while they stood together with the politics of the artists and they were eager to encourage speech at all levels and a different type of engagement of sort of a catastrophic event or a state of immigration for a certain audience and a certain portion of the population, they were unable to stand by it at the end of the day and not able to deal with this type of criticism on the show that was addressing sort of very particular types of things like language, positioning, and also the tone of an institution keeping an arm's length from radical politics or really allowing the artist's voice to come through in the case of an exhibition like this. And the exhibition itself was stunning and beautiful. It consisted of, I think, 3 or 4 really large wall tapestries as well as a cast cement piece in the back. So that I just wanted to share that. That's a story of us getting almost halfway there, but it still shows how much work there is to be done for us to really engage you, to engage the public properly with what it is that we're dealing with an artist and what it is that we're really trying to say. Institutions are the leaders and arbiters of where populations absorb art. I end by asking institutions again to stand by us, to stand by our politics as they were your own. Our diversity and viewpoints are not a dog and pony show. They are a light, a strength, and a strong vision. We provide the blueprint for dissent, assurance, condemnation, feeling safe, and feeling seen. We ask that you believe us, pay us, and let us work in this, the most dangerous form of the freedom of speech. Thank you.
So let's cut to the chase, because you kind of spoke about this. So I'll ask you a few questions, but don't worry, we have actually enough time. We have until 10 after 10 to have a conversation. And so you folks on the ground here, as well as the people virtually, will have time to ask questions. So really what we're talking about is the forces of gentrification and how artists are being, you mentioned this in your talk, and how artists are being run out of cities. And certainly this is not just the concern of artists. Affordability is a key cry at the moment amongst many different communities. What are some of the ways that you think we can, start to think about to help with these two particular problems as it relates to artist spaces, artist ability to work? And can you share with us some of the ideas that you have? Because I know you also have your own.
I have my own solutions for these problems.
Yes, exactly.
But it can't be the only solution. I'm opening studios for artists in Scarborough. And I'm a poor single mother. So like, if you just can think about that thing and like why I have to do this. So, on many levels, like we're seeing funding cuts on many levels, which is to the arts sector, which is ridiculously short-sighted. And I just I can't imagine the thinking that, I can kind of imagine the thinking that goes into this, but it's still hard to stomach this thing. I feel like, I know a few MPs, I know a few politicians, like the fact that the politicians, like the people who go into the House of Commons that I know, are feeling exasperated by this isn't a good sign. So I just feel like more numbers and more bothering people at all levels of government to stop cutting funding to the arts. Art is what makes cities alive and livable. I mean, if you can think of Toronto's a huge foreign investment city. We have a lot of foreign investment real estate deals that are brokered every single day. We're losing tracts and tracts of land in the city, and they're being bought and sold. But, you know, I just kind of think about where these foreign investors are coming from. Never mind, like, you know, super Torontonian, Canadian white people buying blocks of the city. People coming from cities that have a established cultural ongoing funding base and are alive with arts and culture because they're prioritizing it on purpose, like, you know, making sure that they're prioritizing that every single year. You know, they're gonna come, they have purchased their properties here, and then they're gonna show up and be like, where the hell is the arts and culture? Like, it's being washed out and it's in the hands of like, a few of us are like trying to like carry this on our backs. Like, it's just not enough. So, I mean, you know, I always like to point the finger. I love complaining, and like complaining about money and pointing a finger at money is like a great way to do it for me, you know? Like, it's being diverted to certain other streams. Like, can that be looked at? And how can we make the case to re-divert funding back into the arts sector and re-enlivening, or like at least trying to sort of reverse the effect now that it's been having, I think, for 5-10 years in Toronto, losing funds in the arts. It shows, right?
Yeah, and Armin yesterday said something quite insightful when she was talking about, you know, how do we address this idea of redistribution of resources, right? And I think what tends to happen is we have this situation where the meager resources are then have to be doled out to separate communities, right? Yeah. So the artists are pitted against the healthcare workers, are pitted against the et cetera. And so what Armin was saying, that, you know, what we have to do is to have some form of collective movement to say all of the things that we're engaged in are important for society to thrive. Yeah. And that we can't kind of compare all, you know, pit these concerns against each other.
Yeah, that's definitely a dead end. I mean, you'll remember from that wonderful stock photo, like it's just, I showed that to give an example of like the lack of importance that's bestowed on people who work in arts and culture. Like, it's like kids in an art, like it's forever, it's kids in an art school or children painting. Like, that went on and on. I had to go like, you know, 4 scrolls to see someone of color in that whole thing as well. So like, that's also weird, you know. So yeah, I mean, it should be, I mean, the other thing is that when I brought up provincially delegated, like when they're delegating funds at the provincial level into the arts, I mean, Toronto is inside Ontario, but Toronto is very different from Ontario, right? So like, when there's funding cuts coming from a provincial level, I think about this all the time. It's like, you know, they have no idea what they're doing. Like, you can't do this to a city of Toronto needs arts and culture very badly. I'd say, I mean, in Montreal, they're doing a slightly better job of paying for the arts and making sure artists are fed and housed and feeling safe, and as a result, their arts are wild, you know? Like, you go out there, there's festival on festival on festival, and artists are having an easier time than they are here. And I feel like that's the province of Quebec understanding that about the city of Montreal, but I can't say that the province of Ontario, judging by the way they're behaving about arts funding, I don't say that the province of Ontario understands that about Toronto.
So how do we make them understand?
Oh man, that's a good one. Write letters. I don't know, I might not have enough proximity to the people that I need to speak to make that happen. I mean, now the budgets are in, right? So it's like we have to wait for a cycle, but advocating just before they're doing their review and having your kind of phone on the pulse of that, and like maybe you're advocating for it, or like signing the petitions or sending them to friends, or I'm not really sure. I mean, that's definitely my next step as someone who feels the need for artists to be treated better in the city. But I'm getting there. I'll find out.
Do you think a narrative change is necessary? Because you did kind of also mention that in your talk, which is, you know, for many cases, we think we need artists in order to kind of make cities beautiful, so for aesthetic purposes only.
Yeah.
But then you make mention that actually you need artists and designers in order to be able to be leaders and be the architects of what our futures could be through their practices. So how does that narrative change? Like, do you see that narrative starting to change in?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, the Mercer show is a great example. I wanted to give that example of like of that idea. I mean, a population understanding what artists can do. Or as you're mentioning, like things turning over from an aesthetic recognition of what an artist does to a conceptual understanding of what an artist does. You know, as far as population go, that will take a longer time. It's on institutions to understand our breadth. So without that proper support, if that foundation is broken, it's hard for us to sustain ourselves to last long enough to get to the population to have a wider understanding of what it is that we're trying to do here, you know? So
shelter and food first before you can even.
Well, I mean, recognizing artists' need for it. It's not a hobby. Like, it's really hard. We have families. Like, it's hard out here. But I mean, yeah, that is changing. That's totally changing over time. But sometimes it's still kind of falling short a little bit, but that's okay. This is growing pains. Mind you, I'm not feeling like pessimistic about any of this. It's just I want to show you the growing pains between us and making the world, you know, leading thought and making the world, showing you how much better the world can be, or the way that it is, you know, the nasty ways that it is, the beautiful and dreamy ways that it is. You know, there's things in between. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a provocative question, and then I'll turn over to the audience, which is the art market.
Ooh.
Well, because on the one hand, we're talking about artists sort of being part of critiquing late capitalism and things like that, and perhaps our conceptual understanding of what they can offer in those critiques is important for us to get to. But on the other hand, they're very much also participants in that kind of late capitalism frame.
Yeah.
How do we balance that tension? Is it a tension? Is it something that we can resolve? Because obviously I'm not saying artists shouldn't make money. Yeah. Artists need to make money. Artists need to be valued for what they do and what they contribute. The art market is a weird place, though, in terms of the fact that most often than not, it's people with lots and lots of money who can have access to those types of.
This is a huge problem. Yeah. So personally, I mean, that's such a good question. Okay. Personally, what I've done. In regards to the last part of it, I've always tiered my things to make sure that people can have it in their home. Now, participating in the commercial art market is necessary. Like, again, I don't want to turn over to institutions again, or provincial or like city funding, but like these kinds of things really alleviate our pressure to perform inside the commercial art market. You know, I mean, the part where it gets dangerous is where we're dulling our politics to present inside a commercial market, where a lot of the times these people with lots and lots of money, they're definitely part and parcel of the huge problems that in some cases we're dealing with in our artworks, things like poverty, things like the climate crisis. Like, I mean, I've had my work bought by banks that are fueling, they're funding big oil directly. So it's just kind of like, but if I don't do that, I can't feed my kid. Like, I can't feed my kid or pay my rent. So it's just like, you have to make hard decisions all the time. But I feel like if you're always chipping away, so I mean, a recent conversation I've had with my dealer is just like, you know, we're gonna now start to evaluate more deeply the ethics of the places that we're doing commissions for and we're doing sales to. Like, we have to start to do that. But you definitely have to get to a place where you can even do that, because as I said before, you know, institutions and funding towards artists, you know, the fact that we have to make these dicey considerations, maybe that's telling on what's available to us by right. Like, what should we just be able to have? I'm very much of a believer in, you know, I participate in the granting system, but it's so much red tape between us and some money just to develop a series that'll benefit, you know, some poor portion of the population, like that'll do a lot for like someone who's younger or even, you know, a certain group of people. We shouldn't have to be having our eye on whether or not this is going to sell to, let's say, a rich white person to make work for someone to make work for a group that's might be our people, you know, a set of immigrants or something like that. That should be available to us so that we can develop our vision, you know, without the pressure of capitalistic thinking or participation.
Yes, thank you so much for answering that, because part of what we're trying to get at these 3 days of Democracy Exchange Summit is that these are complicated things and they're nuanced things, and more often than not, the answers aren't just black and white, you know, and that it's okay to be in tension, it's okay to be in discomfort as you start to build out the ideal situation, right? And
it's important. You need to face all of that stuff.
So, okay, so given that we've got the Slido, I want to make sure that we have time for some folks on the ground to ask questions, and the people on our virtual cyberspace community. So does anyone have a question on the ground here?
Anything at all?
I'm going to come up.
Yeah, please.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So I love that you bring up the important role of artists in terms of place in public discourse.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in terms of your own art practice, the special role that artists play in terms of complementing or working in tandem with people who are writing or that kind of thing, in terms of cognition, there's a different thing happening, and we think of artists as maybe having this other level of penetration in terms of hearts and minds. Could you speak to that in terms of your own practice and how you're approaching sort of the superpower that artists have in terms of their contributions to the
beautiful question. So that's tapping it. So I want to make sure that I understand it. What is my own engagement with the development within my practice for? What is my own engagement with the ideas that's in my work versus the engagement from outside, sort of, I guess, scholarly action on the ideas inside my work? Is that a good way to think about what you're asking? I'm having a hard time. Is that okay? Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely, you know, different audiences. That's another reason that I brought up, like, an immigrant practice within, and, you know, what is normally generally regarded as a sort of a more academic or scholarly art institution, and engaging with, I mean, you know, I've been lucky to have great scholarly engagement on my work. A lot of it has to do, the best of it comes from people who are writing about my work who are not from here, and have a close sort of, a closer ethnic tie, or like who are existing closer to an immigrant life will get closer to my work. That's the way that I feel about it as well. I mean, when I put my work together and come up with a series, I mean, Traveler is an example of a series that I've done that engages with immigrant futurism directly. So, like, that's something that really expands an audience here in Toronto. Now that show is touring Canada in these different places. Yes, they're trying to get it into immigrant-centric parts of Canada, but I don't really know, like, the way that a writer or a scholar would engage with the work would definitely depend on the context of the city that they're living in, the audience that exists within that city, and the particular way that they would engage with my work. Yeah, I don't know. That's the best I can do.
We talked a lot yesterday, you know, at the Foresight workshop about where artists fit, not only as individuals, but as communities with other kinds of people, particularly healthcare workers, people who are dealing with all kinds of challenges. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've built coalitions.
Build coalitions.
Yeah, and how you've worked in communities.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Right now, I don't have too much of a history of community work. I feel like that's expected, considering my work normally considers large swaths of humans together. And that's a part of, making identity-based work, if I'm making it to any degree. But I've just recently become like this is the closest thing to like an ongoing, fostering an ongoing community that I'll be involved in. I've just become like the president of a nonprofit. So I incorporated, and then we're ready to move to these next steps. And of course, I'll be in touch with the Toronto Arts Foundation as well eventually, if not coming to this debate on the 21st. But yeah, I mean, building community and being a part of a community seems to be like, I was very siloed for a really long time, since I've started a professional art practice. I was just kind of doing it on my own. There's having a small child, as soon as I started my career, kind of kept me out of places where I could like be all together with a lot of artists. There aren't a lot of children in the arts world. If you'll notice, artist creators tend to not really have kids. So it was a little bit challenging on time and things like that for me to really get involved with community per se. But now I'm trying to series 11 now, so I can, you know what I mean? I can bring her out and do things together with her. But yeah, starting the first little sparks and blips of a community out in Scarborough and wanting to build that out with artist tenants. And, there's also, mind you, the back end of this project, which I've spoken to Anna about, which is bylaw and policy research in regards to gentrification and its effect on artist communities, especially in big cities, and how quickly that moves. So, and I'm hoping that'll grow it even more and bring people in together, from the hub that Anna's starting, and different types of sort of different groups that are united with the same cause, which is now, broadly, this isn't a problem, mind you, that was even recognized 5-6 years ago. This is a serious problem now, so everyone knows how artists are running, and it's got to stop, and people are coming together to alleviate this issue, and I'm one of those people, so I feel very excited about it. So I hope that answers, yeah, it gives you kind of a little bit of a pass and it goes into future, so I hope that.
Thanks, Rajni. So Rajni was talking about the Cultural Policy Hub that we're trying to put together at OCAD U, and Miriam is here if you can raise your hand. If people want to get involved, talk to her. But there's a question at the Broadband Institute, and then we'll come down here because I want to get the virtual people involved. Clement Nokos, Broadband Institute, would public art representing racialized working class help build support for arts funding, e.g. public art of CDMX celebrated and depicts working class politics?
Oh yeah, 100%. That's always, I mean, I'm a little bit scared of that. I mean, that always helps, right? But there's often sort of while there's a status quo of like where funding and support goes normally, and it can be sort of nepotized in some cases, or recurring funding that's always, even though, there's an establishment losing relevance or what have you, there's a tokenization of these types of issues and them going on to public artworks in certain neighborhoods. So that's kind of what I've seen, and that's between Scarborough and downtown Toronto. CDMX is a whole other beast, and that is a storied place with deep political ties between artists and revolution. Toronto is a much younger city, so I don't know if coming in with depictions of this subject matter somehow solves a really great overarching issue, but it can. I'm not saying that it can't. There are instances. I mean, I feel like representing racialized working class people, it depends on the neighborhood you would put it in and the reason you're putting it in. So that's like a heavily contextual type of situation, I'd say. But it's not a Band-Aid, and we can't be doing that. I've seen it done. It's not.
Excellent.
Thanks, Rajni, very much. It was a really thought-provoking talk.
Thank you.
I just wanted to raise a question around something that you touched on, which was kind of this idea of the role of the artist in experiential learning. So, for example, having school groups coming in and seeing art. And I work with International Development Research Center based in Ottawa, but we work a lot overseas, and we have supported some work in trying to, I don't want to say use art because it sounds so instrumental, but in working with artists to portray and discuss very contested issues in very non-confrontational spaces. So kind of like the cognitive dissonance, which is unleashed through art exhibits, et cetera, just gives people a safe space to talk about really contested issues around democracy. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, do you see a role for the artist in that, or is that more the role of educators? And how can artists do more of that kind of work? Because I see tremendous potential for that.
Yeah, me too. I have work up at the McMichael Museum, the McMichael Museum in Kleinburg right now. That was made to house the work of the group of 7, and now I have my work in there, and they're kind of like building and strengthening this roster of Indigenous artists from all across the country and showcasing these artists, immigrant artists, and opening up what does it mean to be a Canadian artist. So like, I'm just saying that because it's a huge example of a gallery that's taking an educational standpoint on purpose. They're just like, we're gonna, grow that capacity of this museum now. And they definitely, that's an example of a museum, and maybe you should be very much in touch with them if you're not already. It's the McMichael. You probably are, but that's an example of a place that's really, really doing that work. The role of the artist as an educator is another thing that I want to bring up, and it's not on all artists. Like, it's not, I'd say it's probably not good to like do an umbrella term of artists, because there's so many different types of us with different intentions on what it is exactly we want to do with our work. There are some of us that I know very well who just want to sit and paint. They don't even want to sell their work. And then there's the other side of it, like myself, and there's lots of like, confidence, hubris, things, belief that I can get all these things done that I have to then sustain, and because I'm starting these educational efforts or community building efforts, and I've got to keep that fire up. So it's like a game of stamina, as I'd say, in regards to artists being educators and the educational capacity of the artists themselves and what it is that they want to engage with and when and things like that. But the gallery as a space for education, and as you're saying, like this, it's becoming this like beautiful open platform and for discussing issues that in other spaces, of course, personally, I don't understand why all issues can't be discussed in all spaces, because that's an issue of tact. And I think that that's the case of politically contested artwork within what can be regarded as kind of a politically beige exhibition space, and the political beigeness that's associated with exhibition spaces has a lot to do with, like I showed that chart at the beginning, the way that in museums and institutions are staffed. Where these people come from, the countries. Of course, in Canada, there's a very, puritanical, non-political way of engaging with arts and culture. It's not where I come from. It's not the same. People get into fights. Like, it's not, what I mean? Like, it's a very different thing. And the more we diversify and look at that, the greater, I think, the capacity for the gallery as an education institution will really, really grow. The more and more we pay attention to things like that. Who's behind the helm? What's the vision they have? How much are they an action person? Will they really get it done? And what's their tone on political work and having difficult conversations within the space that they're running, right? Because they're going to direct now the people, who they're working with to continue this tone and enforce this tone of either openness or silence or fearfulness or what have you. I think that's very much a people type of answer. It's like, it's the people that'll grow that potential, or, leave it be stagnant or shrink it or what have you. Yeah.
What a wonderful answer. And because I'm sensitive to the fact that you have to pick up your daughter.
I have to pick up my bubba. She called me before the talk. She's like, Mommy, I don't feel well. Like, okay, I'm coming.
I don't want to run over time, but I just have one question for you. For people in the audience, virtually and in person, who want to help you with your Scarborough project, what should we do?
You can get in touch with me through my website. I have a contact form. I have some people who have already reached out. Thank you very, very much for that. You know, Scarborough is a very special place. I come from Scarborough. The greatest artists in Canada come from Scarborough, and it needs to be protected, nurtured. It needs to be sort of shielded against the fast-moving effects of gentrification that we're seeing in the downtown core and surrounding areas. And I think the case can be made for human rights and artist rights to their own communities that they build over time, you know, with, as we have heard about through this talk, a little bit less resources than other sectors. So please get in touch with me and we'll have a chat. And, you know, first and foremostly, looking for the right space right now. So along the Bloor-Danforth subway line on the east side, so Kennedy, Victoria Park, Warden, near the subway.
So City of Toronto folks in the audience, take note.
Yeah, and hopefully we're working together as well to do the bylaw policy making portion of that, you know, because I think a clause we can make the case that a clause can be introduced protecting creative communities. We build the value of real estate after all. You know, where is our right to that value? So
excellent. Thank you so much. Let's give Rajni a big hand.